Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for joining us today for our the thrilling conclusion to our four-part August-long series of all things grants. So today we're going to be turning from sort of the pre-award elements that we've been talking about up to this point, and we're going to be talking about grants management today and stewardship. As with the other sessions that we've held so far, this one is going to help you if you're managing grants for your organization just by yourself, or with a small team, or if you're working with Purpose Possible or working with consultants. So we will go ahead and just jump right in. A couple of housekeeping things first. If you have questions, just drop them into the chat as we're going along, and we can either answer them as they come in or at the end. And then if you're interested in watching those other sessions, those are available on our website. I think they're also linked from our social media channels. And then also anyone who's attending today will receive a copy of the slides. So there's a couple that are kind of a wall of text, and so you'll be able to see those kind of at your leisure. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Andrew Jones. I'm a consultant with Purpose Possible. I've been with Purpose Possible for about 2 years now. Been in the grants field for over a decade, working on just a wide range of projects, which has kind of carried over to working with Purpose Possible. I work with organizations that do environmental sustainability, education, even some criminal justice related work. So just get to work on a wide variety of things, which is indicative of our big client portfolio. So Marcy, I'll kick it over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. My name is Marcy Ruffle, also a Purpose Possible consultant. I've been with the organization a little over 2 years now, and my background my clients have been largely in the arts and culture sector in Metro Atlanta, although I'm starting to drift into behavioral health. And throw it over to Tricia.
Hey everyone, my name is Tricia Ward. I'm also a consultant with Purpose Possible. Probably the newest member of the team here. I started back in June of this year with the organization, but have been in fundraising, nonprofit fundraising for about 20 years now. And my most recent role, I'm based out of Nashville, but my most recent role was solely focused on grant writing. So excited to jump in and share with the group on what we've learned so far.
Okay, so in this session, we'll begin by looking at grant agreements, then talk a bit about funder recognition, dig into grants management,
Oh, I think Andrew is glitching just a little bit, but we'll go ahead and get started with the very thrilling world of legal documents. We're going to kick it off with grant agreements. And please stay with us because this is important and you're going to learn a whole lot along the way. So, but grant agreements, this is a document between a grantor and grantee that outlines the terms and conditions of a grant. So what are you typically looking at when you receive a grant agreement? These are kind of the major pieces that will recognize. And then Tricia is going to go into which, as a grant writer and someone who's doing grants management, where you may have the most work in these different areas. But a grant agreement is going to identify the parties, so the grantor, the funder, and the grantee, the organization that is receiving funds. It'll give you a purpose of the grant. So it's going to clearly describe the specific purpose for which the grant funds are being provided. This prevents a misuse of funds. And this is often where when we talk about restricted versus unrestricted funding, this is where you're going to see those funding restrictions that are put in place by the grantor. You'll also see the grant amount, how much money are you getting, and what the grant term is. So this grant term dictates, the period of time of when funds can be used and how long a grantee how long they have to complete the funded activities. You'll also see a payment schedule. This is something we all like to see. When and how those grant funds will be dispersed. Will they be dispersed as a lump sum? Is it going to be installments? Especially if you're doing a multi-year grant, you'll often see the funding kind of parsed out over several installments. This section may also include conditions that must be met before a payment is made. So for example, if say you're doing a capital campaign and you have to raise a lot of money, the grant agreement might say, hey, you've got to reach your fundraising goal before the grantor will pay out. Or you may have to submit a mid-year report before the second installment, the second payment. These are two real-life experiences of mine. So another thing that you have to consider when you're kind of doing your grants management. All right. So the use of funds, again, includes provisions that restrict the use of funds to the purpose specified in the agreement. This area might also address what happens if the funds are not used in accordance with the purpose of the grant, or if there are any unspent funds. So on kind of in a scary area, the grantor, if you're not doing due diligence, if you're not following what's laid out in the grant agreement, a grantor might cancel remaining installments or even recoup awarded funds. So you want to always make sure that you are paying attention to what is in this agreement. You'll also see reporting requirements. There will be often some language around an audit or record keeping. Grantors often include a requirement that the grantee must maintain accurate financial records and retain them for a certain period. And the grantor may reserve the right to audit these records. You'll also see language around acknowledgement and publicity. On the scary side of things, maybe termination. So what would happen if there's a breach of contract, a misuse of funds, or a failure to meet reporting requirements? And there's usually an indemnification clause. Whew, that's a mouthful. And you'll also see some language around amendments. So, and the process for making changes to the agreement. Typically, amendments must be in writing and signed by both parties. But again, check your grant agreement. There might be different language there. You'll usually see an area for signatures from the grantor and grantee. And then there may also be some language in there around a renewal schedule. So this is really important when we think of making that next ask, is how long a grantee must wait to return to the funder for a project renewal or renewed funding. So this might be, it could be you've got to wait a year or two. You may be given the okay to just continue to ask for a renewal, but something very important to pay attention to. All right, we'll go to the next one. And so just a little bit of legal talk is kind of, you may see a grant agreement labeled as an agreement or a contract. So how an agreement is titled does not control its classification. It is the substance of that agreement that controls how it will be classified. So on one side, a contract, that's an agreement between two parties, usually requires adequate consideration by both parties and exchanging of money from one party in exchange for services or property by the other. A grant agreement, which is what we all typically deal with, is generally intended to be a transfer of money or property without adequate consideration. So meaning that there is little to no obligation to provide anything in return. So I'm going to stop talking about legal stuff and throw it over to Tricia on a deeper dive into grant agreements.
Thank you, Marcy. You get your grant and you're super excited about it. And as Marcy has just described, there is a lot of information in the grant agreement that is super important. So hang on to that excitement, but also look at the grant agreement because it's going to give you some important information for how to move forward with your grant and kind of let you know what's coming next. Some of the things that you really want to pay close attention to are deadlines. Your grant agreement will have notes on deadlines for grant reporting. So you might have to do grant reports every 6 months or maybe just once a year. But making sure you incorporate those deadlines into your other grant-related deadlines, however you're tracking that, whatever tool you're using for that, what the grant period is, and spending deadlines. So how long is the period of time that you have for spending the funds that you received? Another thing to look for is sometimes an agreement will have a form or a template that you need to use for reporting. This might be, they might have an online portal that you have to log into to submit reports. They might be fine with you emailing it or even writing an informal letter, just giving them a rundown of what's been going on in the last 6 months or last year. Some funders like the Wells Fargo managed funds, they will include a grant report in the grant agreement. So that's definitely something you want to keep an eye out for. They will also, as part of that, have the reporting requirements. So that means maybe they require certain supporting documents like your annual report. Usually will require tax documents like a W-9. Or they might want you to have a narrative describing how the grant funds were used, and some of them like having testimonials. So it just depends, and every funder is different. And then recognition guidelines, that is something that is really important that seems like it would be obvious how you would recognize a funder, but it's sometimes can be very particular to that funder, how they want to be recognized. So in our next slide, we are talking about funder recognition. So the first most important thing, we want to make sure that this remains less of a transactional relationship and more of a true organic relationship. So in those situations, if you're excited and you're just so happy that you've received this funding, reach out to that funder with a personalized thank you note or a phone call and just say thank you. Like, we're so excited about this. That just gives that personal feel to the relationship. You should always have a donation acknowledgement process for any donation that you're getting, but especially for funders who could be, obviously you want them to be long-term. You want to include them as part of the donation acknowledgement process with a letter. If it's possible for you to personalize it, sign it, maybe make a little note like, hey, it was great seeing you last week at the whatever event. Always good to include that so that they can just see that you've put eyes on it, that, that's more of a relationship type touch point. And then looking at the grant agreement for guidelines on how the funder wants to be recognized or how they don't want to be recognized, which is not something that's always so obvious. So for example, some family foundations don't want recognition. They may not want to have recognition so that they're being hit up by a bunch of people that don't fit their focus area, their giving focus. So a donor might say they want to say they don't want to share their private personal contact information, or they only want their donor advised fund account name on the given over to the grantee, and they want to keep their personal other personal information private. So and then you also have anonymous donors. So really being mindful of those details that should be in the grant agreement. And if they do want recognition, making sure that you recognize them on your website, social media, newsletters, events, really just acknowledging them wherever you can. And if it's unclear, if that information is not present in the grant agreement, I think it's always good to reach out to the funder and find out, like, hey, I just need some clarification on how, if it's okay if we do a social post thanking you guys. So, and part of that clarification that I think is really important when it comes to grant funding is the distinction between corporate sponsors or corporate funders and corporate sponsors and grant funders. Because those two things, we've recently, like a client of mine, we had a conversation about that, how recognition for grant funders is different from corporate sponsors. So a corporate sponsor is giving your organization funding in return for marketing benefits. So that's sort of a more two-way street. Whereas with grant funding, you are recognizing them, but they're not receiving marketing benefits. So they're not going to get a tent at a walk event or things of that nature that are promoting their organization. It's really more about recognizing them and thanking them, but not doing marketing benefits in return. So that's an important distinction to make when you're recognizing funding. Logo usage is also important to keep in mind, and that those guidelines hopefully will be in your grant agreement. But again, you can ask if you need clarification. But if it's a corporate funder, they may have guidelines on how to use their logo. You might need to get approval from them when you are putting their logo on something to recognize a grant funder. So, for example, I had a corporate client that gave us a grant, and they had a very long PDF of different guidelines that they wanted for grant recognition. And so we had to make sure that we were working closely with our own communications team and our graphics person to make sure they understood what those guidelines were, so that we were following those when we were recognizing their grant funding. And of course, celebrate. We want to celebrate this news with our board members, with your staff, with your partners of your organization, and especially those departments within your organization that are affected by the funding project. So you're going to have to work closely together to implement the grant. So you want to make sure that everybody knows that the funding was received. So that will help a lot with moving forward with implementing what the grant funding will be used for. And now I will kick it over to Andrew, who is going to talk about grants management more.
Thanks, Tricia. So grants management, it's a big topic, and we were chatting about it and felt like kind of a good way to think about it, sort of break it down for those who are managing grants, is to think about it as organized, collaborate, and monitor. So the organization piece is really huge. We talked about the grant agreements, which you really need to read those closely and build a schedule from the grant agreement. So when are reports going to be due? What is the grant period? So you want to, and we've talked in prior sessions about tracking your grants, having some kind of a dashboard that you're tracking grants on, and this is a good place to plug in report deadlines. You can either have it as a separate sheet or a separate tab, or just track them alongside grant application dates. So you'll want to make sure that those big elements from the grant agreement are in there. And then a lot of times proposals will call for you to create a timeline or a calendar for the project. So if there's major activities that you're thinking of or that will be involved with the project, you want to make sure that those are also included in the schedule. The other important thing to do is to create documentation. So in the past, working with grant staff, I've created just a one-pager with kind of the whole scope, deadlines, kind of an overview, how much or what like an overview of the budget. And that's just nice to have, if somebody comes behind you, if you leave a position and leave the file. And it's also great for the program staff, just so that they have a really quick, just a quick overview. Tracking sheets, this is for, we'll get to the monitoring section, but creating tracking sheets where you've got your metrics that you need to track, your goals, objectives, other performance metrics, creating, spreadsheets where you can track those over the months of the grant. These can kind of be, it's sort of up to you what's the best way to use these, but those are highly recommended. And then report templates. So as we mentioned in the grant agreements, sometimes you'll have an appendix where you'll be able to see what is going to be required in the report. So creating those files, having those in the files to, that's another good thing to share with your project team, just so that they can kind of see what are the elements that we're going to have to report on. And then creating a filing system. Again, if you leave a position, or you don't want to leave the grant or leave folks in the lurch. So having sometimes some places it's a paper file, but using something like Google Drive or OneDrive, just to make sure that everything is well organized. I've in the past used like the acronym for the funder, and then use the year or something, just to really try to keep things organized, because especially if you have grants over multiple years, you've got applications, you've got reports, agreements. It's really great to, or you'll find it very helpful if you really keep track of everything carefully. And then there are all kinds of software solutions out there. If you're, once you get to a certain level of having a large portfolio of grants, sometimes those solutions can be great. They are a little bit expensive, and the only one that's coming to mind right now is Instrumental, but there's plenty of other options out there. But the cost can be a little bit prohibitive, but it's something to consider. If you do have a large portfolio. So then the collaboration side of things. While you were developing the proposal, and this assumes that you're doing the pre and the post award, which is pretty typical most organizations, but you would kind of already have your project team that would have helped with the proposal. So that would be the program staff, the folks who are actually going to do the activities, your finance staff who presumably helped develop the budget, hopefully, and your leadership. You do want some leadership staff. It can be whether that's just someone in management. It's helpful to have that person, just so that there's full awareness of the grant, across the organization. And then those folks need to know what are their roles. For example, if you have multiple program staff working on a project, who's going to be responsible for, tracking data about, the patients you're serving or the students that you're serving, and who's responsible for collecting stories from participants or collecting survey data. So you just want everyone to know right from the start, what do they need to be doing to to support and facilitate this, effective management of the grant. And then something that's really important with the staff is, and anyone involved in the grant, is to just emphasize the importance of compliance. You want to meet all the goals and objectives that you've laid out, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So be, just encourage folks to be, honest. If there's a problem, the best remedy is to just communicate with the funders. So they're also, the foundations that you're working with, government folks. You just want them to be, a partner in the whole thing too. So regular communication with them is also kind of an important part in that compliance aspect, because if something is not going to plan, reaching out to the funder, making them a partner in the whole thing, and addressing any problems before you're submitting the reports can really be to your benefit. And then monitoring the grant. So you provided goals, objectives, and other metrics in your grant, and so now you've got to track the data associated with those. And again, this would be program staff might be tracking any data related directly to activities, and then your finance staff can track budgeting. Obviously, sometimes it's just you doing it all, because that's what happens in nonprofits. But in however you do it, it's really important to track as you go. You don't want to get to 2 weeks before the report or 2 hours before the report is due and you're scrambling around for data. You definitely want to you'll find it a lot easier if you just file this as you go along. And that goes to using a centralized tracking system. So if the tracking sheets that you created in that organization step, sharing those with the staff who are going to be handling reporting, it can be really helpful that everyone can see the data as it's coming in, and then that again allows for some course correction if you need some need to make changes or adjustments or speak to the funder. And meeting regularly with your team is also a part of that, to get ahead of any problems, and just to kind of, again, if you need to make adjustments or need to chat with the funder, the best time to do it is not when the report goes in, but before that. And then tracking your impact, both quantitative and qualitative. So things like, success stories or impact stories, in addition to all of the quantitative data that you're tracking. And then something that a lot of funders like for you to monitor is, your sustainability. What are you doing to, are you seeking additional funding for the project? Have you figured out a way to, generate earned income off of the project? So thinking about ways that you can make the project, if it's one that you're going to continue, make it last beyond the grant period. And something else, and this goes to kind of finding other sources of funding, is leverage. Funders will sometimes ask about, how did this grant help you secure funding from another source? So that's something to, something to keep track of as you're monitoring the grant, as you're managing the grant. Marcy, Tricia, I'll kick it over to you again.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So you've got the grant. You have all of your grant management tools in place. You're doing your regular meetings with different team members. You've got your spreadsheets look beautiful. What's next? And that is stewardship. So stewardship, again, we're going to just scream it multiple times, but it's all about relationships, and we're trying to cultivate partners, givers, not just gifts. So in stewardship, you want to make sure that you are communicating things to the funder and, again, just building that relationship. I personally find it very helpful to have a stewardship calendar. And a stewardship calendar can be as simple as just a Google spreadsheet where you have kind of your funder, what they're funding, and I like to usually do about one touch point a quarter. So if you are scheduling this out and you're making sure that you are having consistent, clear communication with the funder and not just sending them the final report. So a couple things that you can start with funding stewardship is inviting your funder to participate in the events or the programs that they are funding. This is where they can really see your impact in action and, the value of their investment. So also think about tagging funders in social media posts. So if you got funding from a grantor to create a new homeschool program, with their permission, and if you're able to take pictures, you have to get a lot of permission from parents if you want to tag them in it, but always make sure that you ask first. Andrew talked about this, but being upfront and transparent about challenges. Don't wait for a funder to find out about any issues. And I will say, being in Metro Atlanta, it sometimes feels like all of the funders talk to one another. So you want to make sure that you're having good experiences with all of these funders. And, because if you have a bad experience with one, who knows who they may tell, that may impact your relationships with other foundations. So again, you want to, if you're collecting your data and your qualitative feedback all along the way, it shouldn't be difficult to share stories with this information that demonstrates the value of a funder's investment and also your accountability. So it shows that you're staying on top of things. And we always, no one just wants to get just raw data. So build a story around what you're doing. And then also, don't wait until that final report to share impact and good news. If you are doing a year-long program or an ongoing project, send in photos, testimonials from visitors, etc., to share with the donors. This quotation right here is one that is from one of my clients. They received funding from a Metro Atlanta foundation to completely fund a pilot program that was it was a week-long institute to take 25 teachers from across Georgia and teach them on techniques to teach civil rights. So this quote is from a participant in the program. They had emailed the director of education, who then emailed me, and then I was able to email the funder and just kind of off the cuff and say, hey, look what we got. Look at what your impact is. This person says, thank you both so much for creating space for us. This has been an amazing week. I cannot begin to tell you how much this means to me as a social studies educator. We are oftentimes overlooked. However, you see us. This week needs to slow down because I'm trying to soak it all in. So by maintaining a relationship with this funder, we were actually able to go back to them for a renewal this past year. So again, a little bit of work goes a long way. Okay. And I'm going to throw it on over to Tricia to talk about playing the long game.
Thank you so much, Marcy. I did have one additional kind of anecdote for just letting funders know, sort of, even if it's not right around reporting time. I had a funder last year who funded our volunteer program, and we had a volunteer appreciation week that fell outside of the reporting, kind of at a weird time. So we were like, we're just going to go ahead and send them pictures from that. And it was so great. They were like, we want to see this all the time. Like it just really re-energized them. And sometimes that helps going in, as we're talking about playing the long game. If these relationships are lasting over the course of several years, sometimes you need those little touch points that are outside of the reporting to kind of re-energize the funder and kind of remind them why they're in this partnership with you. So along those lines, if you see your funder in the news, send them a congratulatory email or, text or call. It's always a good idea to kind of keep an eye on the local business journal and just kind of keep your, ears peaked for any little bits of news that might involve, any of your funding partners. And you can even set up Google alerts for your funders' names just to help you kind of stay on top of that. Consider inviting them to join maybe your advisory board or a committee. Again, that is just part of keeping them engaged and showing them that you value their opinion about just organizational matters in general, not just as it relates to the funding project that they've helped with. You can involve them in strategic planning discussions, same kind of in that same vein. And I love this idea, develop case studies for the funder relationship. So if you reach out to them and say, hey, we've really had a great partnership. We have a meeting with our development committee coming up, and I'd really like to highlight kind of how your ideal funding relationship would look like, what that would look like, so that we can show this to our development committee, and then that can help inform them as they're trying to scout maybe new funding partners and new connections that might help with funding. So that not only helps your greater board with, giving a specific example, but also, again, shows your funder that you value that relationship and it's not just a transactional one. And again, reaching out to your funders for their opinion on matters, not necessarily related to to what you've applied for or what you received a grant for. That can be, hey, we've got this funding project that we are thinking about doing, but we weren't sure if, we just wanted to get your feedback and see if that's something that you guys would be interested in. That can look like even kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, which is making sure you're staying within the guidelines set out in the grant agreement. Maybe, and this has happened to me before, where I wrote a grant and we didn't end up using all of the funds. We actually had leftover funding. So we reached out to that funder and said, hey, we just want to be fully transparent. We have leftover funds. We wanted to make sure to see how you guys would like us to use those funds. We have some ideas, but we just wanted to keep you guys in the loop and also get your opinion on what to do with those funds. And of course, they appreciated that. And we're like, oh, yes, of course, use it for operating or whatever. But it just shows that you're being a good steward of the funding that they're granting you. And that's super important to the relationship. So yes, as a reminder, this is a relationship and funding is a natural extension of that relationship because we give to people or things and causes that we care about. So do not be afraid to do these extra steps, because that is just part of building that relationship, and that will make it feel less awkward and more natural as you're kind of building up this partnership with your funders. And now I will throw it over to Andrew to talk about more details about reporting.
So, in the prior section about grants management, we talked about monitoring your grant, monitoring your progress. And, most grants do require some kind of a report. They're funding your project because they want to see some kind of impact, of course. So this is your opportunity to, talk about what is working and maybe what isn't. grant reporting, why it's important is that it's, again, it's essential often to remain in compliance with your grant agreement and, subsequently to maintain your funding. So it's something that you should, take seriously. It's not just we got the grant and kind of, we're all good. It's something to really, it is something that you should really focus on. And a big part of thorough grant reporting, honest grant reporting, is that it establishes credibility and trust with your funder, which is really important if you're planning on seeking funding from them again, or as Marcy mentioned, if you have funders who talk to each other, they want to know that they're investing in projects and people that are trustworthy and that they want to partner with. So the other thing is, kind of that's sort of an external aspect, but then internally, grant reporting, if you take it seriously and do it well, it does offer opportunities for continuous improvement, for learning about your project, learning about your organization. Do you need more capacity? Is something that you, an activity that you proposed in the grant just not really working the way that you anticipated? Doing the reporting and also beyond just submitting the reports, but that monitoring aspect, you can really figure out better ways to to run your project or program. And then the other useful thing about reports is, in some cases you can, especially if you're receiving funding from multiple sources for the same project or program, doing a really good job on the report, sometimes you only kind of have to do it one time and you can use it for other reports. And the other useful thing about it is that it's a great tool to share with internal stakeholders. So if board members are wondering about how a grant is going, you've got this report, a report that you can share with them. And then, it also helps you to make a case for future funding. And that's not just with the funder that you're submitting the report to, but, the reports can be used to, as kind of like Tricia mentioned, sort of like a case study, it's something that you can present to other funders to demonstrate, that what you're doing is working. And then some common types of reports, progress reports. So that would be, sometimes you'll see quarterly reports or, 6-month reports. And then you've got kind of your final summative reports, and then financial reports, which are also often just kind of, part of the progress and financial reports or the final reports. And then impact and evaluation. You'll see these, if you're, and sometimes the impact and evaluation is also just part of the progress or the final report. But sometimes, and I've seen this working on federal science grants, they'll really want to see, and you'll have an external evaluator or something for those grants. So they really want to see an in-depth analysis about the impact and the steps you took to evaluate the project. And then something that's kind of interesting and frustrating is that you just when you receive the grant report, you'll sometimes get a copy of or a grant agreement, you'll sometimes get a copy of the report and you can kind of see what's required. But, it's just kind of wild how much it varies, how much reporting varies. I've had $5,000 grants that require 5-page reports, and I've had $100,000 grants where, it's like this example here where it's just one question, 500 words or less. Like, you just don't know. I mean, this foundation here, the example is, you get a 60-page guidebook on how to submit the report. So you just really don't know. The reports vary very widely, but it's something that you do. If you can get ahead of this, or you've worked with the funder before, and you know what kind of work is going to be involved with the report, it can really help when you're establishing timelines or working with your project team and saying, we know that we're going to need to start on this report a month ahead or something like that. But it is the variance in reports is interesting and sometimes frustrating. So some grant reporting tips. Again, as we mentioned in organizing, you need to carefully track your report deadlines. Use whatever kind of formats, and a lot of times you'll submit these via an online portal. So keeping track of those passwords too, where you're keeping track of the report deadlines, can be very helpful. You do want to provide ample details and acknowledge any setbacks and failures. A lot of times, projects that funders are investing in, they kind of know that they may not work, or that it's something that they're interested in trying. So again, just be honest. Save publications, videos, photos, links to things, about the project, and sometimes you'll have opportunities to share these in the formal report, but you can also just as the last bullet, supplement your required reports kind of with informal check-ins. So just pass those kinds of things along. But those materials are great to include with the formal reports. And then beneficiary, asking those affected by the program for stories and testimonials is really great. And sometimes funders will actually ask for those kinds of stories. So this is just an example of just a totally made up example, but it does a good job of encapsulating kind of everything that the program has done for this person. If you can get a quote like this from somebody that's participating with you, it's great to have, because a lot of times funders do want to see kind of the human side, because that's ultimately what they're investing in is changing lives often. And then graphics and visuals, as I mentioned, including sort of these. Sometimes funders will ask for an actual, annual report, but a lot of times, nonprofits, everyone gets busy and there's not time to produce, a full annual report, multi-page kind of document. So, creating sort of little infographics like these can be very helpful. And Purpose Possible does some of this work. So, if you need these kinds of materials, which funders do really like, then that's something that we do offer. So yeah, just be thorough with your reporting, and try to keep it interesting and compelling. And again, it's a really important part of managing a grant, of maintaining a grant, and ensuring that you're in the best position to continue to receive funding. Marcy?
All right. So we want to finish this presentation off with talking about preparing for your next ask. So step one, you've read your grant report or your grant agreement. You know when you can cycle back to funders. So very important to understand those cycles. For renewals or existing projects, conduct that internal review to evaluate the success and impact that your program or project has had with data and qualitative feedback. So again, you should be doing this. If you've been having those ongoing meetings with your team, this should not be a tough thing to accomplish. But you want to make sure that you are telling that kind of comprehensive story, backing it up with data and feedback. You want to demonstrate how those grant objectives were met. It's also really important to consider lessons learned. Where were your failures in this particular program? What could you do better? So consider how to incorporate that insight into future plans. Next, you'll want to ask for a meeting, either virtual or in person, depending on your relationship with the funder and also geographic distance, to discuss future opportunities. So during this meeting, it's very helpful to, again, present that comprehensive update from your internal review. Then provide an opportunity for the funder to give feedback. Where do they think your successes were? What would they like to see more of? And this is an opportunity for you to address any concerns. Next, you'll want to outline how a renewal will increase impact and align with funder priorities. Remember that sometimes funder priorities change, especially with these next generation board members starting to onboard with family foundations. And then also you'll want to emphasize how the relationship has been mutually beneficial. How are you meeting each other's needs? An example of a success I've had with a client and a funder, this particular client received several $100,000 to fund a program director position for 2 years. During this 2-year span, the program director created a 5-year strategic vision for the organization's education plan. Off of this 5-year vision, the client was able to leverage over $3 million in additional funding. So we were able to return to that original funder, 4 or 5 years later and say, hey, remember last time you guys gave us money to hire a program director? Well, we were able to do X, Y, and Z. And we were successful in being able to return to that funder to get funding for the education program, which was really, really great. And then finally, you'll want to continue to sustain that relationship if additional funding is not immediately available. So like we said earlier, you have your stewardship calendar ready. Some of the items that Trisha outlined when you're kind of playing the long game, trying to build that relationship, these are good things to follow. So, but that is, I'm going to check, I think, if anyone has any questions, we are happy to answer them. On the next slide, you'll have our email addresses. And then, of course, we are going to be sending out a resource document by the end of next week with all the slides and any kind of pertinent links, additional reading that we think that you could benefit from. But we're very thankful for, y'all's time. Thank you for joining us. Again, we've shared a ton of information over these past 4 webinars. These are all leading practices. I know it can seem very overwhelming, but, just start with incorporating a couple of these into your routine. I know I've learned a lot just from listening to my other co-panelists, and we'll definitely be making some changes to my own routine to just better how I work with clients and write grants. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or follow up with us via email. But we are very thankful for y'all joining us today. Oh, any final thoughts from Trisha or Andrew before we wrap it up?
No, other than to say that, I've definitely learned some things from working on this. So, hopefully we'll have some more of these in the future.
Yeah, and I would just add to the one thing that you said at the end, Marcy. When you're getting maybe a no from a funder, so that might not necessarily mean no, never. It might just mean no, not right now. So just keep that in mind. It might just be a timing issue, and to not necessarily give up on that relationship just because of it didn't work out one year. So, but yeah, this has been very educational for me as well, and I hope you all found it to be that way as well.
100%. Thank you so much, Trisha and Andrew. Thanks, everybody. Y'all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.